So good evening, PWCS families, and welcome to tonight's session. My name is Yanette Boyd, and I'm the Supervisor for Family and Community Engagement. Tonight's session is the Financial Aid Award Letter Overview. The presentation will be presented in the requested language of English and will be recorded. At this time, I would like to introduce our presenter for the evening. Joining us today, we have Mr. Jason Puryear. He is the director of the College Place in Alexandria, Virginia. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Yanette. I'm going to share my screen. It's always interesting jumping from Teams to Zoom because I forget where I'm at sometimes. Can everybody see my screen? This is financial aid offers. Perfect. Okay, so I wanted to begin the presentation because I've recently received feedback that I don't do the best job at this. So bear with me for a moment, Prince William County families. If you're interested in keeping in touch with the College Place, you can scan this QR code or use the bit.ly below to sign up to receive more information from me. I do a really great job of reaching seniors, but if you have anybody in your household that's in high school, but not yet in their senior year, I need to get to them. So 11th graders, 10th graders, 9th graders, it's never too early to start considering where you're at in the process. Anybody of any age can sign up to receive information from me as long as they're going on and continuing with their educational journey after high school. And it's, as always, it's free support. This is the agenda for what we'll cover in the workshop this evening. And so we'll start with when and where you should have received a financial aid offer in this process. Next, we'll touch on the types of financial aid that you'll see and understanding the terms and conditions that will be laid out in front of you in these award letters. We're going to break down the different components of the financial aid awards that you have received or your son or daughter will have received in this process and make sure we understand what each of those things means for the student and the family. We'll take a look at a sample financial aid offer and then go into a financial aid comparison. And then I'll wrap up this workshop with pieces of advice to take along as you make your decision, hopefully by May 1st. So first, I wanted to begin by sharing congratulations. I know senior year, the college applications process, applying for financial aid scholarships can feel overwhelming at times. You've got a lot of deadlines that are kind of all over the place. If your son or daughter's college list was 20, 25 schools long, you had a lot of deadlines for all of those schools. So for everywhere that you or your child, if you're the student watching this, or for your son or daughter as a parent watching this, I wanted to just take a moment to say congratulations. The hard work has paid off. We've got some options to consider. So I want to take a moment to review what that means for you. So just want to do a quick check-in here. When I'm meeting with students and families, especially when it comes to the financial aid process and submitting the FAFSA or the VESA, I know which is not on the screen, there can be a delay when you submit these initial financial aid forms and when you receive information back from a college or university. So just want to clarify here, this FAFSA submission summary that the student received, usually within 3 business days of completing their FAFSA form, is not the same thing as a financial aid offer. The FAFSA submission summary is sent directly by the U.S. Department of Education. The summary and the data contained within that is what is used by every college or university that the student is admitted into to generate the financial aid offer that they're going to send to the student and their family. So your student aid index will be on your FAFSA submission summary. You want to double check to make sure that that information is correct. When you log into the student's studentaid.gov account, they can click on the 26-27 FAFSA year and open up their FAFSA submission summary to double check that. It's important to make sure that the student checks to see that their data was sent to every institution that they wanted it to be sent to. We are about 2 weeks away from the May 1st priority deadline in terms of the response. So if you're checking the FAFSA submission summary and you're seeing that data was not sent to a college or university, it's not too late to go in, submit corrected FAFSA by adding in that additional school code or two. But time is running out. So if you notice that a school is missing in this process, maybe the students received emails in their student accounts that they have not been checking. So you're wondering where a financial aid offer is from an institution they've been accepted to, check their email first and check their FAFSA submission summary to make sure all the data went everywhere that we wanted it to go in this process. When you receive financial aid awards, there'll be a lot of information contained within them. I want to make sure that the parents understand that this process can feel a little unnerving because a lot of this information is not being communicated directly to you. The entirety of the emails and messaging and phone calls, SMS that's going out at this point in the process is going directly to the student. So for any parents listening to this presentation, if you haven't heard anything, that doesn't mean any messaging is not going out. It means that your son or daughter might be ignoring a few messages in their inbox or some text messages from unknown numbers. That happens frequently. So if you haven't heard anything or if you're not sure where your child is at in the process, just take a moment to check in with them. Sometimes this is a part of the process where students get really overwhelmed because they have so much incoming that they're not sure how to bring you in. So if it's that and they're feeling overwhelmed, don't be upset. Just take it a piece at a time in terms of reviewing information and making sure that everybody understands the data that's contained within. Because usually there's a student portal that your son or daughter needs to log into. George Mason's the example on the screen here. You're going to have to log into Patriot Pass to get access to the financial aid award letter to see what the breakdown is and to be able to accept and or decline the award as it's presented to you as a student and as a family. In terms of the different categories of funding that you'll see in the award, grants and scholarships are what everyone wants to see in this process. Grants are typically free money that are coming from a federal or state agency, and they'll come in a few different categories in this process. If the student has received a Pell Grant as a part of their financial aid award, that Pell Grant will be the same number across every single financial aid award letter. If they receive the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant or FSEOG fund, those are dollars given directly to colleges by the federal government. So that amount may be one number, so $1,000 at one institution as an example, $2,000 at another, and $750 at another. Even with the student aid index being the same across the board, colleges disperse that at an institutional level. Scholarships can come from private outside agencies. They can come from some governmental agencies and from the college universities that the student has been admitted into. So a few different directions that the money can be coming in, but it's free. For both grants and scholarships, it's important to read the fine print for what is the requirement to receive those funds on the front end, to understand if those funds are renewable year over year. Sometimes scholarships and or grants may be a one-time only thing in this process. So as you're doing the math to understand what the net cost is for the student and their family to pay for the education, and make sure you pay attention to those things as well. It doesn't happen often with public universities. You see this more with private institutions. They use it as a recruiting tool to build in their freshman class. Sometimes those scholarships will hold over the course of the next 4 years, but you always just want to double check to make sure. There may be a GPA requirement that you have to hit in order to sustain a scholarship award year over year. Make sure you understand that. Sometimes it's tied simply to the student aid index remaining roughly the same if it's a need-based scholarship year over year. But it's critically important at this point to read the fine print. Sometimes financial aid award letter itself may only be one page, but then the additional pages that come with it that explain each of the scholarships may be 3, 4, 5 pages long. So do take the time to read that additional information. If you have questions, you've got time still in this process to reach out to the undergraduate admissions office and or financial aid to ask for additional details about what scholarships and awards are included there. For work study, this funding may be institutional or federal. If the dollars are coming from federal work study or institutional work study, the result is the same. The money is not provided at the beginning of the semester. The student has to secure employment and clock hours to earn those funds. I've seen federal work study allotments range from a few $100s to a few thousand. Sometimes institutional work study can be in that same range, but it really depends on the college university that we're talking about. So just make sure that if you're going to use work study funds to close the gap between what aid is being offered and the net cost, that the student is aware that they have to work to earn those funds. And then last but not least are loans and or borrowed money. There may be federal funds that have been made available to the student and the family to pay for their education. If it's a subsidized or unsubsidized federal student loan, those dollars are dispersed in the student's name, so they're borrowed in the name of the student. If they're covering direct cost, which we'll cover more in a moment, but it'll be dispersed to the institution first, those direct costs will be covered. And if there's funding left, then that will be for indirect costs that will be dispersed to the student as a refund. If parents are taking on a Parent Plus loan, those funds are borrowed in the parent's name, but the funds are dispersed to the school to help pay for the cost of attendance. And then if there's private funding, it's still typically funding that's going to be sent to the school, whether or not it's the parent or the student that is qualifying for the awards. In terms of interest rates, make sure you're checking those if you're choosing to borrow money to pay for education. And when it comes to borrowing funds to pay for school, it's important for students and families to have a conversation about what is a reasonable amount of money to borrow. For some families, that number may be zero. So it may vary from one family to another. For some families, you may be comfortable borrowing $50,000 to pay for an undergraduate education. Other families may be comfortable borrowing $100,000. These numbers add up quickly. And remember, as we're looking at a financial aid offer, the money that's going to be presented is for one academic year only. If you're borrowing money, you need to multiply that by 4 or 5 years, depending on the length of the program that your student is enrolling in. So make sure you're doing that math as well. In terms of the cost of attendance, I've already mentioned this previously, but direct costs are costs that are billed directly to the student. If somebody's required to live on campus for their freshman year, a direct cost will include tuition and fees and their housing and food. Usually because there's a requirement to sign up for a meal plan as a freshman student if you're living on campus. So all those costs as a part of the cost of attendance are billed directly to the student. They won't see a bill outside of financial aid, and they won't get a reimbursement for indirect costs for housing or meals at that point. Housing and meals, if a student lives off campus, would be considered indirect cost. So that would shift from this direct cost category to the right of the screen under indirect. That does include books and supplies, depending on the major. There may be a larger supply cost than others. So when you're comparing one student to another, as an example at George Mason, it's not just important to pay attention to what the student index is or the overall cost of attendance. Sometimes majors have differentiated tuition, so make sure you're paying attention to that as you look into the overall budget. There are personal expenses that come up in this financial aid budget. Sometimes these are items that parents are able to take care of on the student's behalf. Sometimes the student has to take care of all of these costs. So as you're thinking about insurance, personal needs like deodorant, shampoo, stuff like that, that's all built into this personal expense category. So make sure you talk about those. And then last but not least, transportation. For a student living on campus, the transportation expense may be relatively small, especially if you live close to home. If you are going further away to college, university, maybe you have to fly to get to your campus, your transportation costs could be really high. Similarly, if the student is planning to commute back and forth and they're needing their own vehicle, gas, and insurance to do so, that transportation piece could be a larger part of the budget as well. Have conversations about all of these costs as a family. One, because there may be some ways to save money. Sometimes private schools will discount tuition and fees. That happens rarely, if ever, at a public institution. And then for housing and food, if a student has their own bedroom now at home, if they want the same thing in college, it's going to cost a lot more. So if you're looking to save money as a family and you're having a conversation as a family about what housing needs to look like, to save money, student needs a roommate, sometimes two. Depending on the budget and what you're trying to make work in this process. One area that I personally advise students and families not to budget on necessarily is food. You know the student, You know what they need in terms of sustaining and maintaining their diet. When I was half the age I am now, I ate 2 to 3 times what I do now in terms of daily intake. I used to joke that I had it wasn't 3 meals a day, it was 3 meals and 3 snacks. So I had breakfast, morning snack, lunch, afternoon snack, dinner, and sometimes a second dinner. I ate a lot. And so if that is you, the student, or if you're a parent listening, if that's your kid, you might be thinking, hey, maybe we can save some money on this food. Be careful with that. You want to make sure that the student is being well fed so that they can sleep well, that they can focus in their classes. You can save money in other areas in this process. So just be careful about trying to save too much money when it comes to food. Books and supplies, you can absolutely save money. Don't go to your campus bookstore. If you're looking to save money in this process, they're going to charge you a premium from everything. You can rent or purchase previously used books from other students. Utilize social media here in this process once you go onto campus. Just double check with professors to make sure you can use materials from a previous semester. Usually it's okay. And then from personal expenses, transportation, sometimes these are areas where families can help students in this part of the process in terms of budgeting. But if a student has never been responsible for this budgeting on there, and have a conversation with as a family as far as what gas costs look like. We all know, especially right now, gas is going up almost on a daily basis. If a student is not prepared for that, they can very easily under budget what it's going to cost them to get to and from class if they're commuting. So just make sure a student understands what all these costs are in this process. From there, we've already mentioned the cost of attendance, so those direct and indirect costs. I've mentioned the student aid index a few times, but I want to be clear here. The SAI is a number that's going to be generated by the FAFSA or the VESA, so the Virginia Alternative State Aid Application. The lower the SAI is, generally the higher the financial aid need is for the student. So the larger amount of need-based financial aid the student will receive in this process. The sticker price, what you may have seen throughout the admissions and financial aid process, is the cost of attendance for freshman year based on whether you're in-state, out-of-state, if it's public, private. That goes into the sticker price as well as housing and other expenses. The actual amount that students typically pay is a lot lower than the sticker price. And the net price is what is that real out-of-pocket cost for you and your family. The sticker price is usually highlighted on the financial aid offer. You'll see the student aid index and cost of attendance broken down. And as aid is awarded to students through this process, what you should see is grants and scholarships subtracted out of that total cost of attendance. So it gives you a picture in terms of what free money is being provided to the student that does not need to be paid back. From there, there will be a list of what is that leftover remaining costs. Some schools will go further and say this is what you can cover through work study and or federal loans that are being offered. And then they'll subtract that out of that total number and then leave you with the net price. I mentioned that because in working with students and families, sometimes people will miss that as a part of that net price calculation. College university has already included federal student loans in a category above. So you may be looking at a net cost of $15,000 without realizing that the actual total true cost to the student and family is $20,500 if the net cost is 15 and the 5,500 in federal student loans is included in a category above. I've been working with a lot of students and families so far this spring that have missed that on some financial aid offers. So as you're reading through the letter, make sure you're paying attention to all the lines that are there and catching where loans are included above where net cost may be shown. So, Jason, what are you talking about in terms of all these terms and information? Here is a breakdown of what sticker price may look like. So tuition and fees is what it costs to be in the seat to earn the credential. Housing and meals tends to be relatively the same if you're talking about a public and private university in the same area. But total direct costs will look different because a private university tends to charge a higher amount in terms of tuition and fees versus a public institution. Books and supplies for the same major or similar major will be roughly the same. And personal expenses and transportation usually hover around the same amount. But indirect costs can vary. And then here is an example of the total cost and a comparison between a public and private institution. Let's stop real quick to see if there are any questions so far, because I know this is a lot of information that I'm throwing at you.
Tracy, can you open up the chat just for a couple of minutes? And families, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat and we'll be able to see them. Ms. Hong, are you able to type your question in the chat? I see that your hand is raised. I think we can continue, Jason, and then we'll allow for questions at the very end as well.
Yeah. So continuing, we've got two sample financial aid offers, or a sample financial aid offer, rather. You see the cost of attendance continued on the left side of the screen, so total cost here, and then a sample financial aid package. Like I mentioned earlier, for a student who receives a Pell Grant, this figure should be exactly the same on one financial aid award letter to another. If it is different, that means somebody's data is incorrect in this process. So if that does happen, I would follow up directly with the college university where you've seen that data mismatch. If you're only comparing two schools, I would check with both personally, but the number should be the same. From your FAFSA submission summary, you also have that dollar amount available if you received a federal Pell Grant. So that I would go to that first to double check that for its accuracy. And if anything is wrong in your financial aid package, I'd go to the school that has that number incorrect in comparison to that FAFSA submission summary. There may be an FSCOG grant and or college scholarship. In this example here, total gift aid for the student is $30,000. Their estimated cost of attendance, I want you to keep in mind a total of $60,000, even though here the net cost is saying $24,500. This is one of those examples that I mentioned where an institution may be highlighting everything that the student is receiving to cover the direct cost, but indirect costs might not be a part of that factoring out process. So as you're comparing one financial aid offer to another, make sure you're capturing what everything is being added into in terms of the financial aid package, but also these bottom line figures, net cost, total gift aid, does everything add up in this process? So that when you're comparing them, you know. Total direct cost for the student will vary from a state institution to a private institution. If you're looking at indirect costs, again, generally they're going to be roughly the same. But again, this is where cost of attendance comes into play between a public and private institution. So you'll see different dollar figures in this. And I know it can be really hard out of context. Oftentimes when I'm talking to students and families, the amount of scholarships can be really tempting to make you commit to one institution over another. Just make sure you're breaking down where those dollars are coming from and if they're covering as much of the net cost as you need them to. In this example, it turns out to be the case. The private institution has offered enough in terms of grants and scholarships to make the net cost to the student in this scenario lower than comparably to a public institution. So in this scenario, the student may be better served by going to a private institution than a public. The question is, as you're going through, make sure you're understanding the grants and scholarships and their sources, that you're understanding what GPA requirements or major requirements that there may be. Sometimes there is it's even broken down into a credit amount that you have to earn on a semester by semester, year over year basis to maintain eligibility for those funds. Sometimes here, and this is not to say that it happens more often than not at private institutions, but sometimes financial aid offer for freshman year comparison may include one-time only scholarships, maybe in they may call it a visit scholarship, or they may tie it into commitment scholarship. in terms of committing to an institution. There's a few different ways that colleges phrase this terminology in their award letter. Just double check to make sure that is something that's going to hold over the course of 4 years. Generally speaking, the scholarships will at a public university, but I also encourage students and families to double check to make sure that that's the case for public institutions. Long story short, regardless of whether it's a public or private institution, in-state, out-of-state, doesn't matter. For any grants or scholarships, please make sure you read the fine print and understand what the requirements are to receive the funding and to make sure that the funding is going to be something that's included in the financial aid process year over year, all the way through graduation. You will see if a student is eligible for federal work study, you'll see different numbers from one institution to another. Sometimes it's a matter of what the institution typically awards based on the student index. So they'll have their own internal formula for deciding what they're going to include in a financial aid package. Sometimes it's based on a conversation that a student family has had with financial aid as a follow-up to the financial aid offer. So those individual conversations can have an impact. Whatever federal student loans someone is eligible for, those numbers should be the same. They're actually capped initially based on the year that the student is enrolling into post-secondary education. So freshman year, sophomore year, junior and senior year, those three categories have different loan limits from a federal standpoint that a student can borrow. There are ways for unsubsidized loans directly to students to increase those amounts, but that depends on a few different things, a few different checkboxes being checked off along the way. But as you're going through and comparing one financial aid offer to another, pay attention to the net cost, but also pay attention to make sure that the total cost of attendance is reflected in all these categories under it, in terms of total financial aid being offered and then the net cost that the college or university is asking the student and family to cover. This is where I go from formal presentation more into advice. I've touched on it a few times, but this is where I see most students and families get concerned about in the process, or maybe they've missed something in this process. You want to know your cost of attendance. It may be highlighted as a part of the financial aid offer. The good thing about Virginia is that in more recent years, there's been some legislation passed at the state level that's required very specific details in financial aid offers. I mentioned that because if the student is applying to schools outside of Virginia, that might not be the case for those institutions. So as you're comparing schools inside of Virginia to those outside of the Commonwealth, make sure you keep cost of attendance overall in mind and do the math. If the numbers are not adding up for you from the total cost of attendance, the financial aid that is offered, the net cost that is being highlighted through the financial aid process, double check the math. And if you're not sure what's going on, reach out to admissions and or financial aid. That's what their staff is here for in this part of the process. Not going to cost you anything but your time. I will say at this time of the year, it can be really, really hard to reach somebody in an admissions office or financial aid office because it's a busy season for them. I recommend trying very early in the morning. If you're able to take a lunch break in the middle of your workday, trying during that time frame. Sending a message in the evening, it might not get answered that same evening, but usually those are the messages that'll go to the front of the queue the next morning to be answered by somebody in the office. So give yourself some time. Sometimes you might be really lucky and get through to somebody on the phone without any wait. That's the ideal scenario in this situation. But please reach out and ask the college specifically if you have questions. Watch out for loans. Make sure you're doing the math on those as well. Keep in mind that a financial aid offer is for 1 year only. The same way that you filled out your FAFSA or your VESA earlier this academic year, that's something that the student will need to do every year that they're pursuing their education after high school. So this is not a one-time thing. And just make sure you do the math on the loans. I was sitting with a family 2 weeks ago, and we were looking at a private university's financial aid offer. And mom just had a light bulb that went off in her head as we were talking, because we were talking about $25,000 of borrowing for freshman year. And mom was thinking, oh, that's something that we can manage. It's something that maybe even through some payment plan is something that we can take care of as a family. No big deal. And then I asked mom if that's something that they were planning over a 9 to 12 month basis. And mom stopped and kind of looked at me. She's like, what do you mean, Jason? And I was like, well, that's 25,000 for this upcoming year. The plan to make that manage, as long as you're operating on a 9 to 12 month basis, you'll be fine. Because then the college is going to come back and say, for sophomore year, you might need to borrow another $25,000. She's like, oh, she hadn't thought about it because, and then doing the math, that 25,000 became $100,000 in borrowing that the family was going to look at, and that's a different number to digest in this process. So as you're looking at loans and what a college university is asking for you to borrow, just do the math over the course of the number of years that you expect your student to be in college. Um, that is also true for any program that requires maybe a fifth year of learning. Some public funding in terms of grants and scholarships may drop off after a fourth full year in college. So if you're going into a 5 year program, make sure you understand what the cost may look like for that additional fifth year. Some colleges have built that in, so they have institutional scholarships that will take the place of federal state funding that may run out at a certain point. But at the end of the day, I want students and families to understand how much they owe before the student makes a decision about where they're going to go by May 1st. And this is an area to tune in to what the school's graduation and loan default rates are. It'll be data that should be included as a part of the financial aid process at some part of the process. So it might not be attached directly to the award letter itself, but colleges and universities are required to have this data available to students and families to see. So if you're not seeing it in the process, reach out to admissions and financial aid to ask to see this data to make sure you're making a good decision based on both what the school is asking you to borrow and that you're looking at the outcomes on the back end as well to make sure it's a good overall decision for the student and the family. But have a talk as a family. This is something that I wish I had done more when I was the student's age. My mom and I didn't talk a lot about money, and we didn't talk a lot about household budgets. When I was a student's age, it was none of my business what my mom made, what money came in, how she paid her bills, what money went out. And I would never ask a student and their family to be that blunt and that open. But everybody needs to talk about money and budgeting and what it costs in terms of the money that needs to come in, what things look like in terms of money that goes out, how bills are paid on a month-by-month basis, especially if the student is looking at living in their own apartment, having their own cell phone insurance, not having a meal plan, so having to budget for food every month. Have a conversation as a family about all those things. Remember that loans have to be repaid. As much as the media may cycle up news stories about student loan forgiveness or different generations borrowing money and then not having any intention of paying it back, the reality is for student loans, federal, private, regardless of their source, the idea is that if the money is borrowed, the expectation is that it's going to be paid back. So have a plan, talk about a plan as a family as far as what's a reasonable amount of money to borrow and what the plan is to pay that money back. If it's a Parent Plus loan, parents, please make sure you can afford that. If it's something that you're going to take out all 4 years of undergrad for your son or daughter, keep in mind that that might be something you have to do over the course of 4 years. If you've got more than one kid, you might have to do it a few times. So it's not just thinking about one student that you have now. If you've got a senior and a sophomore and a freshman and a middle schooler, maybe that's 4 times you have to multiply this borrowing out. If you're looking as between two parents taking care of this for your children, that's great. Just make sure you do all the math that may come in to this process as well. Sometimes I've met with students and families that are over borrowed for older children or the oldest child, and they find themselves in a really tight spot where they can't do the same thing for younger children. So just keep that in mind. At the end of the day, it's the student's responsibility to pay for their education. So parents, as much as we may want to help our children out, sometimes we overextend ourselves and do a little too much. Not here to judge, just here to say that it's the student's responsibility. So they need to have some skin in this game in terms of what needs to be paid back. If they need to get a part-time job, I work all throughout undergrad. It's not the end of the world. It's something that, as long as is manageable and the student is able to keep up with the work academically, it's something that can be a part of an ordinary college experience. And it doesn't have to be the end of the world. It's also a great way to build a resume, build connections for finding employment after graduation. Don't count out scholarships. Not too late to apply. Every high school that a Prince William County student is in is sitting on information about scholarships. You got college and career advisors on site in your school that have information that you should be tapping into to apply for. And then don't shy away from appealing your offer. On the financial aid websites, as you're looking at them, they'll have some very specific forms about if there's been a medical hardship or parents, it may be one of your parents moved in for elder care or medical reasons or economic reasons. And those things are not captured typically in the financial aid process in terms of the forms that you submitted earlier in this process. If that's happened in the last week, it's not going to be captured yet, but you can also factor out from this point forward what expenses may be. You can appeal what a school has offered based on those forms. If you just don't like what the college has offered in terms of financial aid, the formal appeal process probably won't work on that end. But it doesn't hurt to reach out to an institution, especially if it's on the top of the students list. Maybe it's their top one, two, or three in terms of the schools they're trying to decide between. It doesn't hurt to email an admissions office or financial aid office and say, hey, we're seriously considering joining you in the fall, but the math just isn't working for us on our end. Is there any additional aid my student, or if you're the student, that I can qualify for in this process? Or to yield or to get students who have been offered admission to accept that offer. Sometimes colleges will hold back some financial aid dollars in this process so they can award it to get students to commit to the institution. So that's why it doesn't hurt at this point to appeal the offer to see if there's any additional aid. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. This is a part of the process where what may previously have been a dream school for a student becomes a little bit of a financial nightmare because the numbers aren't adding up from a math-based standpoint. But it never hurts to ask. And I was meeting with a parent on Tuesday, and she asked me, she was like, Jason, if I email this school, is anything going to happen? What she was worried about was her son's admissions decision changing or a scholarship offer changing. When you're asking for additional dollars at this part of the process, the only thing it's going to do is help. Schools aren't not going to go back and say, oh, you're asking too many questions. I'm going to reduce the scholarship offer that we gave to you as a part of this process. That's not what this is about. This is just about seeing if there's any additional aid that the student is eligible for. Can we get those dollars for the student before they have to make a decision by May 1st? Then we got one more page of advice in this process. So the initial deposits are typically due by May 1st. There may be one or two deposits that you see in this process. The deposit to hold the student's place in their class is typically what the deposit deadline is talking about by May 1st. So that's choosing an institution. At this point, you can ask for this deposit to be waived and still hold your spot in the incoming classes, up to the college to accept that waiver request or not. There may be an additional housing deposit that is required in addition to this admissions deposit as well. So make sure you're keeping up with that. Have a plan for how you're going to pay if you don't get a waiver or are not going to request one. Because your fall bill is due typically before classes begin, usually on or around August 1st. Sometimes that makes the waiting process a little hard because financial aid typically is not dispersed until sometime mid-July, beginning of August. So those things happen sequentially really close together. But there is a space of time where once you've committed to an institution, you do have to wait to see what financial aid is dispersed going into the fall. The good thing is between your financial aid offer and what is numerically dispersed in the summer, it's a dollars and cents difference. At that point, it's not going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars off from that standpoint. There may be a small minor difference at that point. But here, it's important to choose the college that fits the student from a major standpoint, but also fits from a financial standpoint. I mentioned a little bit earlier where Dream School may have become a little bit of a financial nightmare in this process. This is where it comes into play. If students and families are struggling with how to have this conversation, that's something that I facilitated for longer than I sometimes care to admit in this process, but more than happy to help have a conversation about. Sometimes parents, contrary to what we may want, our kids may decide to do something and then tell us after the fact. If that happens, it happens frequently in terms of students and families that I work with. We can still workshop ideas and figure out what we want to do moving forward. So reach out if you find yourself in that situation too. But May 1st is the deadline that we're generally going to be working towards. And I'll stop here to see what questions we do have.
We did have a couple of questions in the chat. Are you able to see them?
Stop sharing my screen so I can pull up. Good question. So for the direct loans, subsidized and unsubsidized will be federal loans that are dispersed to the student through the institution that they're enrolling in. So subsidized loans are need-based loans that are based on the student aid index. Those interest rates are locked for the life of the loan. And the amount that you can get through subsidized loans will vary from year to year. For freshman year, don't quote me on this, but I want to say the maximum that you can get is $3,000 for subsidized loans. I'll have to double check that number to get the precise amount. But for freshman year overall, between subsidized and unsubsidized loans, the maximum that the student is initially awarded is $5,500 for the freshman year. Unsubsidized is not need-based. So it's not based on the student aid index. It's based on the student choosing to enroll in a college university. Sometimes that amount, if a parent has applied for a Parent Plus loan and was denied for it, that unsubsidized loan limit can be increased, in part to make up for that loan denial. But there are overall limits from this academic year forward in terms of what students can borrow overall from the federal government, which is different than even somebody that went to college last year. And the net payment, for example, the net cost, that was for an academic year. Lowest SAI to qualify. Rita, I'm for full FAFSA, what do you mean for full Pell? Okay. I'm not 100% sure because that number varies based on household size and income. I've got a chart that I can share out. It's just not in this presentation. Your student aid index, though, will determine Pell eligibility. And if a student is eligible for Pell, it'll be included in the FAFSA submission summary. It's a formula, though, so I don't know off the top of my head. It varies based on household size and income. And that maximum dollar amount, though, is for this year, $73.95 for the Pell Grant. Any other questions? So how does the university determine need-based aid eligibility? It's based in part on the student aid index and then the university's formula for assessing need. Because the cost of attendance from one institution to another varies, every institution has their own, what they call methodology for determining need-based financial aid and whether a student will receive it or not in this process. Is it better to accept the loans? Honestly, it's a student and family decision at that point. My advice for families is to have a conversation about borrowing money. Usually this is an area that students have little to no expertise, and whether or not parents went to college or not. Parents, we've all dealt with money at some level. Car note, rent payment, mortgage, life insurance, retirement. We have life experience, whether or not we went to college, in dealing with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of debt, money we pay back, money we're trying to save. This is where we can help our kids understand money a little bit better. What does it mean to borrow $25,000 and repay that over the course of 10 years? What does it mean to borrow $100,000 and repay that over the course of 20 years? It's something that I'd have a conversation about as a family, and every family, honestly, on their own, Rashida, decides what makes sense from a loan standpoint. It's a number that feels different from one family to another. Sometimes it will depend on whether or not the student is going to go into college and graduate in 4 years or less. Sometimes it helps for a student and family to look at the major and what employment opportunities will come after graduation, a career that's going to pay on average $60,000 after graduation. It might be comfortable for that student to borrow $50,000 to pay for that degree. On the other hand, a job that may pay $45,000 at graduation, $50,000 may feel a little uncomfortable because it's more than you make on an annual basis at that point. So I'd have a conversation with the family. I'd look at the data from a college university in terms of their graduation success rate and their loan default rate. That'll give you clues as far as who's able to graduate on time and then successfully repay their loans. And then have a conversation as a family as far as what's reasonable to borrow. And then if anybody wants to have a conversation with me one-on-one as a family, I'm more than happy to help break down numbers and think about the costs that come along with that part of the process as well. Lucky Mary, if you have received a Pell Grant, again, the student will see that in their FAFSA submission summary. And you should also see that highlighted in the financial aid award letter. And Raina, that's a great question. In terms of outside scholarships, it depends on the college university. I would read the fine print for both the scholarships and the financial aid office. Some financial aid offices will replace scholarships with institutional aid first. Others will prioritize the net cost to the student and family first. It just depends on the institution. So if you're applying for scholarships in the hope of covering the net cost of what the student owes, just double check with the college universities that the student is considering that they wouldn't accept outside scholarships and replace institutional aid before dispersing those remaining funds to students to cover indirect cost. And that catches some families off guard where they feel like they're kind of spinning their wheels in this process. So I have seen that happen. So just double check with the institution because sometimes it can affect what they receive in terms of institutional aid. It should not change. It will never change Pell Grant. For all the state grants that are need-based only, it also should not change those award amounts because those are based on the student aid index. So when outside scholarships wouldn't impact it. The only exception would be if the student is in a scenario where they get so many outside scholarship dollars that what the financial aid office would award them is higher than the cost of attendance. The college university can't go above that number. So if the cost of attendance is $30,000, but a student gets $35,000 outside scholarships, the college can't award $35,000 in outside scholarships to the student to cover everything and then reimburse them. They had to stop at that $30,000 limit. Okay. Typically, NOVA doesn't replace, from what I understand, institutional aid, but it may come down to the award itself and what the scholarship is meant to be used for. So I would read the fine print there. Repealing the financial aid offer. Great question, Hassan. At this point, I would send an email and or phone call, something that can be documented. They may have the time to meet with you in person. Sometimes our community colleges are better situated to have those one-on-one meetings than a four-year college university can be, just from a volume standpoint, to be honest. But I would start with the email or phone call, and then if they offer the opportunity to come meet with them either virtually or in person, take them up on that offer from there. Any other questions? These have been great. You all have given me a lot to think about. These are all excellent questions.
All right, I think that is it. And again, as Jason said, these are great questions. Thank you so much for asking those questions. And thank you, Jason, again for joining us today. We appreciate you coming on and, helping our families navigate the process. And so for you families, again, the session was recorded, so I will make sure that you receive a copy of today's presentation, and I will also include Jason's contact information in the email should you want to reach out or have additional questions for him. We have placed today's survey in the chat for the session, so please fill it out. It takes a couple of minutes. Just let us know how we're doing, and then any future sessions that you may want to see, please give us some feedback on that as we kind of wrap up this year and begin to prepare for you the sessions for the upcoming school year. So thank you, everyone, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you all.